Hello, welcome to the Ancient Foundation Bible Fellowship. My name is Shannon, and along with my wife Lyndall, we are part of Ancient Foundation Bible Fellowship who meet in Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Australia. So as our name says, we are a fellowship who have gone back to the ancient foundations of our faith and have decided to build our house on the rock, who we believe to be Yeshua, our Messiah. So in these shows, if you haven't been with us before, we'll be discussing a wide variety of topics with a focus on the Hebrew language and culture. As it is my opinion, these are the context our Bibles were written in. So if you're joining us today, don't be afraid to say hello and on the chat box, whether you're on whatever platform you're viewing this on. Don't be afraid to say hello and join us and let us know who you are and where you're from, if you're okay. So, as I like to do, I like to share my screen with you so you can follow along. So just give me a moment while I set that up. Rightio, there we are. So today, there we are. So today we're going to be talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. As for most of us, I don't know, as I understand, most of us are pretty much in the middle of the week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Me being in Australia, I'm a day ahead of all the Americans, so we're a few days into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So I thought, well, why not talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread? As some of us would understand that there's a lot of meaning and connection to Yeshua, our Messiah, in this feast. So we're going to be going through the feast. This is a general overview of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I understand there's a lot of depth and meaning in it, but I'm just going to go through and give a general overview. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the second feast of the year and coincides with the Passover meal. The feast begins on the 15th of Aviv, which is the first month of the biblical Hebrew calendar. So in the scriptures, the first month was just a little over 2 weeks ago, scripturally. Not as what our tradition says in the Orthodox Jewish community and Judaism. They celebrate the new year on the Feast of Trumpets or the first of Tishri. But for us, for the scriptures clearly state that Nisan or Aviv, which is the biblical name, is the first of months. So this feast is pretty much halfway through the month, and generally, like the Passover, is on the full moon. Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread coincide with each other. But this is the second feast of the first month. The feast goes for 7 days. It is the Passover week, which is the first of 3 times the Hebrews were commanded to go to Jerusalem each year. So this is this time. Thousands of years ago, in this very time we are in now, all of Israel, all the males, were commanded to go up to Jerusalem to celebrate and come before Yahweh 3 times a year. And this is the first of those times. So have a look at your screens with me. And we'll go through our first scripture, and it's Numbers 28:17. And it says, on the 15th day of this month is the feast. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. Leviticus 23 verse 6. And it says, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So here we have two accounts, two scriptures saying that when this time is and what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to eat unleavened bread. We have to eat unleavened bread or unleavened things in this 7-day period. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at this text, when you look at these passages in the text, the Hebrew word, which we're going to touch on a little bit later, is matzah, for unleavened bread. But in the text, it actually says matzot, which is plural. So many get caught up on eating unleavened bread, but it could be unleavened things, as in the plural. Interesting. Anyway, the first day and the 7th day are both Sabbaths. No work shall be done on those days. We either have a holy convocation or a gathering together to celebrate on these days. So on the first, this is a 7-day feast. On the first day is a Sabbath. This is why Yeshua had to be taken down off the cross or the execution stake before evening, because it was going to be a high Sabbath, the Sabbath day being the first day of unleavened bread. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was the weekly Sabbath, because each feast day in Leviticus 23 is a Sabbath day. So when they took Yeshua off the cross, they were referring to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is why they had to take him down, which also marked the night they ate the Passover meal. So on that first day, where they have a holy convocation, a meeting, a celebration, and on the last day, on the 7th day of the feast or week of unleavened bread, we are also to meet and gather together and celebrate. So look to your screens with me again. Exodus 12:15 to 20. And it says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So here we see quite clearly already through this passage that on the first day and on the 7th day, they are Sabbath day. No work shall be done on those days, except for that which you may eat. Verse 17, you say you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Whether he is a stranger or a native of the land, you shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. So unleavened bread or food is anything that has no yeast in it or has been puffed up or risen up. Anything that has not gone through the leavening process. To be caused to rise or to puff up by this leavening process. This is what unleavened bread or unleavened things or unleavened foods are. Anything that has been caused to rise or to puff up or has gone through this leavening process. What one needs to understand is what this means at the time that it was written. For example, in those days they had no dry yeast, self-raising flour, etc. If you leave... Now, I used to own a pizza shop many years ago, so I know a fair bit about dough because we used to make all our own dough for our pizza bases. If you leave dough on the bench for a period of time, it will rise, as there is leaven naturally in the air. You can't get away from it. Leaven is in the air naturally. So in those days, they had no dry yeast, they had no self-raising flour, they had no raising agents or whatever we have today. The bread was leavened in the air. This is why their bread was made in haste. More on that later. And one also needs to understand is that the offerings that were made on the altar were always unleavened. Those offerings that were presented before Yahweh, those grain offerings, the minkar offerings, they were always unleavened. Nothing on the altar that was presented was leavened. It was always unleavened. So we are also to remove these leavened foods from our houses and not have any leaven for the 7-day period, for the week, for the entire feast. So leaven is in one way connected to sin, pride, arrogance, and being puffed up. The feast of unleavened bread is in the springtime in the northern hemisphere and autumn in the southern hemisphere. So if you're in America right now, you are in spring, known as the spring feast. But for us who are in the southern hemisphere, like us in Australia and all the other countries down here, we're in autumn. So it is autumn for us. But Israel is in the northern hemisphere. The Bible is written in the northern hemisphere. So that's why these feasts are connected to those times of year. It is suggested that this is where we get the terminology or the idiom spring cleaning from, as in the removing of the leaven in the natural, in their cleaning out their houses of the leaven, they're having a spring clean. This is where it's thought that this terminology comes from. So from this, we learn the principle of cleaning and removing leaven in the natural is also applies to the same principle in the spiritual aspects and behavior of our lives. We are to look inwardly in this time and we are to get the leaven out, come before Yahweh. It's a time. One thing with the feast of Yahweh is that a lot of them cause you to look inwardly and to look at yourself and to keep short accounts with Yahweh, to keep you on that path of righteousness, to repent if you've been off to the left or to the right. The feast keep you on track. And this is why it's such a good thing to try and implement these things in your lives, because all these different feasts through the year keeps you on track, keeps your Yahweh before you when you remember these times and try to do what you can in these times. They keep you in Him in your life. They keep His ways in front of you. So it's a time to look inwardly and search our temple, to search our house, to see if there's any leaven, any things that we need to work on and repent of. The feast times always has us looking inwards and keeping checks on ourselves. Like I said, keeping short accounts with Yahweh. To ask ourselves, this is a good time of year to ask ourselves, are we becoming more like Him and less of us? It's a good time of year to see if we have been growing. Are we different this year than what we were this time last year? Are we growing? Are we understanding Yahweh more? Is our relationship deeper with Yahweh this year than it was last year? Is he more in our lives? Are we making decisions more in line with his word and his ways than what we were last year? So this is a beautiful time, a great time to it's a measuring stick to see how we're going, to see if we're growing, to see if we're changing, see if our minds are being renewed in him. So now we're going to go through some words to get a better understanding of unleavened, leaven, and what it is represented here. Excuse me. So we're going to go through some Hebrew words now to get a much better understanding. See, when we read unleavened in our English Bibles, it's just, okay, unleavened bread without yeast or whatever. Or when we read the word leaven, the Hebrew conveys so much more meaning. So let's have a look at what these meanings are. The Hebrew word for unleavened bread or unleavened things is matzah. Matzah. And it means unleavened bread. A hard and flat bread, cake or wafer, made without leaven. It's a food that can be sucked on. It can mean the action of draining or squeezing out a liquid by wringing, in the sense of like wringing or squeezing out a wet cloth. It also means to suck, like the pressing with the lips. Means to suck like the pressing with the lips. So in Australia, I don't know in America, but in Australia, we have a hard, dry biscuit, and it's called a sayo. It's a sayo, and it's really hard. It's actually a bit like matzah bread, and yeah, you get the sense of sucking on it, and it's got like it's really dry. If you don't have it with any butter or any other spread, it's a really dry. It dries the saliva in your mouth. It's a really dry biscuit. We actually have a challenge that I think it's if you can eat 10 sayos in 5 minutes, it's nearly unheard of, because the more you eat it, the more it's hard to swallow. It's hard to take in, because it just literally dries out your mouth. It's that dry. So it's this sucking, wringing out like a wet cloth of moisture. This is connected to the word matzah and unleavened bread. So what does all this have to do with unleavened bread? Maybe it was Yahweh that squeezed them out or sucked them out by force from Egypt. He literally had to drive them out by the hand of Pharaoh. My only experience was that he squeezed me out from the denominational church that I was in. Through a variety of circumstances and revelation and understanding, I was squeezed out of the church that I was involved with. Many of you probably can relate to that. You were forced out or squeezed out by a set of circumstances, by the scriptures being opened up to you and realizing that things aren't being done as what they should. And not only that, before that, I was drawn out from the life that I was in before I even went to church. We all who call ourselves believers would have that experience. Matzah also has the idea to hasten, or that which was made in haste. All this can be combined together as they were told to be ready to go, to leave at a moment's notice. Yahweh orchestrated the whole situation, and he was completely in control. That whole haste and being ready to go and being girded and having your sandals on your feet, ready to go. Yahweh's hand orchestrated the whole lot. Another thing I want to bring out is another word that has the same root, and it's pretty much pronounced the same way, matzah. Now, in Hebrew language, when you have words that come from the same root, they are called variants, and they often have a very similar meaning, whether a more intense aspect to the original root, or whatever that may be. It is of the same family. So therefore, we can make a connection. All these words are connected together, just like in a family. The sons and daughters are connected to the mother and father, or the aunts and uncles, or whatever it is. There is a connection to the main nucleus of that family. So it is with Hebrew. There are many words that come off from the same root, and they're connected in meaning as well. So this word matzah, spelt with an aleph at the end instead of a hey, it means to find out, bring out, or to find deliberately. So what is amazing about this word is that maybe when we eat matzah, the unleavened bread, who we know to be Yeshua, the one that was without sin, the one that was without leaven, the one that was pierced, maybe we find him in a real way when we partake of that unleavened bread. Here's a picture of what unleavened bread looks like in those days. Round cakes, wafer-like, really flat, because obviously it hasn't gone through the leavening process. I have actually a piece, because we're in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, I actually have a piece of it right here with me. Just dropping it everywhere. But I have a piece of it right here with me. Now I'm going to bring it right up close. See how it's pierced? And if I take it back, it's like got the appearance of being striped. That represents Yeshua, our Messiah. The one that was unleavened. The one that was pierced and striped for our iniquity and sins. Maybe when we partake, and maybe when we are actively doing this through the week and eating unleavened bread, maybe we find Yeshua in a deeper way. As I know my experience was when I was in the church, that unleavened bread wasn't not even mentioned. Had no idea about unleavened bread and the connections and the deep relationship it had with Yeshua, our Messiah. I mean, the way that bread's made, they've been eating that for thousands of years. It's been like that for thousands of years, even before Yeshua came on the scene. It was pierced and striped. Quite amazing. So maybe that's the connection with these other words that we're going through to find deliberately. That when we are active and participating in this week of unleavened bread, that we understand Yeshua on a deeper level, because we're deliberately, actively eating unleavened bread. Don't know, just a thought. Okay, let's go back to the screen. Deuteronomy 16 verse 3. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it. That is the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that you may remember the day in which you came out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life. So unleavened bread is also called the bread of affliction. They left Egypt with great wealth and as free people. Remember, they went from slaves and they were set free. This week of unleavened bread reminds us that Israel gained their freedom, as we did, by the hand of Yahweh through the Passover lamb. the bread of affliction, unleavened bread, in their hands, as well as ours, is to remind us of the slavery we were all in, physically and spiritually, and the freedom won solely by Yahweh through Yeshua. So when we eat this unleavened bread, it reminds us of these things in the scriptures, and that we can apply these things to our own lives. It reminds us that we were once bound. We were once bound by sin. We were once under the hand of Pharaoh or the world system. But by the Passover lamb in the natural, and also the Passover lamb of Yeshua, our Messiah, we gain freedom from our sins. We gain freedom from the hand of Pharaoh or this world system. It reminds us of all these things. And Yahweh's created this 7-day period in time, once a year, for us to remember that we were under that situation, and now we're free in Yeshua, our Messiah. Why? Because Yeshua became our Passover lamb and took our leaven upon him. Praise Yahweh. Okay. So the Hebrew word for leaven is Seol. Seol, it's a sin, an aleph, and a resh, and it means to leaven, ferment, and also causing agitation. So when bread goes through the leavening process, without getting all technical and whatever, there's gases and that's released, and that's what causes it reacts, and that's what causes the bread to become leavened and puffed up. There's this agitation happening within the dough. So that's what this means. It means Seol means leaven. It means the fermenting. We all know that if you leave bread too long, it becomes sourdough. And we can also see the action of causing agitation. So this is what the word for Hebrew means, Seol. All these things go hand in hand with it. Another Hebrew word, the word for leavened. The first one was leaven. This one is leavened, is chametz. Chametz, that which is leavened, fermented, souring, leavened dough, foods that have already had the leavening process. This is what we call chametz. Foods that have already gone through this process. The first thing was the action, the process. The second is the outcome of that process. They're both nouns, interestingly enough. They're both nouns, so they're both things. Okay. So the hametz is things that have already gone through this process and received the leaven, and they become leavened, as in a loaf of bread or any other thing that has gone through this process. Exodus 12:19. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. So we see here, it is for the stranger and the native born. And most of us understand that there is one Torah or one law for all people who have chosen to follow Yahweh and his ways. 2 Chronicles 30, verse 21. And it says, so the children of Israel who were present at Jerusalem kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with great gladness. And the Levites and the priests praised Yahweh day by day, singing to Yahweh, accompanied by loud instruments. What a great verse. They were singing, they were rejoicing, accompanied with loud instruments. I like singing. I like music. I like listening to it. I like singing to it, especially when we're in our fellowship and worshiping Yahweh. accompanied with loud instruments. Some people that get upset. See, friends, sometimes we need to lighten up. Sometimes we need to have a bit of joy and gladness and rejoicing in the feast of Yahweh. It's not always this serious time. Yahweh wants us to have fun. He wants us to worship. He wants us to sing with accompanied by loud instruments. It says in this verse that they worship day by day with great gladness and great joy. One would mistake this to be the Feast of Sukkot. This is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Why? Because they free people. They're rejoicing because this time shows them that they were brought out from under the hand of Pharaoh. We should be rejoicing. We should be singing day by day, accompanied with loud instruments. It's a time of joy. It's a time of celebration. Why? Because we're free. Yeshua took our leaven from us. He cast it as far as the east is from the west. It's a time of great joy and rejoicing, and we need to just lighten up and enjoy the week, not get so somber and solemn. We need to have a bit of joy in our lives and rejoice. It was kept with joy and gladness, singing and praising to Yahweh. So how do we see this today in the modern day 21st century Western world? How is it relevant for us today? And what connections are there to Yeshua? Well, first and foremost, for us today, unleavened bread or matzah represents Yeshua himself, the one who was without sin, the one who there was found to be no leaven within him. He was unleavened. Unleavened bread was used with the sacrifices on the altar. Leavened bread was not used. Yeshua's crucifixion is also likened to an altar. So the biggest thing for us today is that this represents our Messiah, righteous, holy, also the living bread, who was without sin. And that those who partake of it, like we touched on before, might find him in a much deeper way and a much deeper level. 2 Corinthians 5:21. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. I'm going to read that again. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Friends, this is why we're to rejoice and to celebrate and to be happy because of this very verse, that we are become righteousness in him. There's nothing that you and I of ourselves can do. We are to be found righteous because of him who knew no sin. What a wonderful verse. Paul also exhorts all believers to still keep the feast, as the context is Passover and unleavened bread. Let's have a look at this. 1 Corinthians 5:8. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So here we see Paul exhorting us, exhorting the believers of the day, writing this letter to the people in Corinthians to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread and also Passover, because the two go hand in hand. They're connected. You can't have one without the other. So when he's speaking in these terms, it's not a new thing. He's referring to this time we're in now. The Passover and unleavened bread are not done away with. They're not finished. Paul teaches to keep these feasts and the others as well. Now it is believed 1 Corinthians was written around 55 AD. So by my calculations, this is around 25 years after the resurrection of our Messiah Yeshua. Just think on that for a moment. 25 years around that time frame, 2.5 decades after the resurrection of our Messiah, Paul was advocating and teaching about the feast. Why? Because they were never done away with. They were never finished. He advocated and taught about these things, about the feast of Yahweh. So again, remembering we're talking about now about what this means for us today. What does this mean for us as a modern day believer? In the week of unleavened bread, we eat things that are without leaven. For example, matzah. And we touched on this before. It is also a time to look into our own lives and our own hearts and seek to get the leaven out. Seek to get the sin out, to ask and seek forgiveness, to keep short accounts with Yahweh. And we also removed 11 things from our homes. Now, that's different for everybody. Different people have different convictions as to what that means. And I'm going to leave that between you and Yahweh and to you and your own convictions. But one thing we shouldn't do is point fingers at each other saying they're doing this and they're not doing that and blah, blah, blah. That's none of your business. That's between them and Yahweh. There is a definite fulfillment of prophecies concerning Messiah Yeshua in the symbolism of the matzah bread. The matzah bread is pierced, bruised, and striped, like we touched on before. It is pierced, bruised, and striped. Like I said, they have made it like this for thousands of years. Yeshua was bruised, striped, and pierced, and also unleavened without sin. This took place when he was tried. His body was beaten, lashed, pierced on the execution stake, which was the preparation day. The exact same day and time they killed and prepared the Passover lambs to be eaten later that night, which was the Passover meal on the first night of unleavened bread. So all these things are connected for us today. There's a picture of a matzah, pretty much the same one as I've got here. Isaiah 53, verses 2 to 12. And it says, "For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Verse 10, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He has put him to grief when he make his soul an offering for sin. He shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for transgressors. So this chapter is about our Messiah being the Passover lamb and the unleavened bread. He became the bread of affliction for us. This is a messianic prophecy. Observing Jews do not like discussing this chapter because of who Yeshua the Messiah is. For also they believe that the Messiah hasn't been yet. But obviously everything that this man Yeshua went through was in direct fulfillment of what we just read out. For them, unfortunately, at this time, it is as if this chapter, Isaiah 53, is not even in the scriptures. And the fulfillment also of an unused tomb is found in Isaiah 53, verse 9. Acts 2, 31 to 32. He, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of the Messiah, that his soul was not left in Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Yeshua God has raised up, of which we are all witnesses. So here we see the testimony of many seeing the resurrection of Yeshua, our Messiah, that he was raised up from the dead, which is also represents another time in this week, which is the Feast of First Fruits. He was the resurrection of the first fruits from the dead. That's for another time. Acts 13, 35 to 37. Therefore, he also says in another psalm, you will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. For David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell asleep, was buried with his fathers, and saw corruption. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. Again, this is Yeshua, our Messiah, who was raised up from the dead. Psalm 16, verse 10. For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. So that is what that psalm was, that it was referred to in the book of Acts that we just read out, that psalm, that Yeshua, our Messiah, who was unleavened, saw no corruption. For he was raised after 3 days and 3 nights. Paul teaches that the believers who were after the death and resurrection, he's teaching them how to keep the feast. 1 Corinthians, look to your screens again. Your glorying is not good. Do you not know? This is Paul teaching them how to keep the feast. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Messiah, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of the malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So here we see Paul teaching the believers to keep the feast. He says, therefore, let us keep the feast. This is decades after the death and resurrection of Yeshua, our Messiah. Paul says not to keep the feast with what he refers to as old leaven. Don't keep it with old leaven or with the leaven of malice and wickedness. What is this leaven of malice and wickedness? This is the teaching and doctrines of men, predominantly of the Pharisees and Sadducees of the day, the oral traditions, the teachings of the elders. Leaven, in this context, is associated with false teachings and hypocrisy. So Paul is teaching them to be separate from those traditions, from those oral traditions, from the traditions of the elders, from the doctrines of men, not from the scriptures as laid out in Leviticus 23 and other passages we read out earlier about keeping the feast. We see clearly in the New Testament that they kept the feast, meaning Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and all the others. They were not done away with. They were not finished. Matthew 16, verses 6 to 12. Then Yeshua said to them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we have taken no bread? But Yeshua, being aware of it, said to them, O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Verse 9, do you not understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And one last verse in Luke 12:1. In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together, so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. So this is what Paul was teaching in Corinthians. Not to celebrate the feast with malice and wickedness, which is the teachings of men, Pharisees and Sadducees. Another way you could say is don't get caught up in a religious spirit, into legalism. The legalism of men, not the legalism of the scriptures. We are to keep the feast of unleavened bread in sincerity and truth. We are to be sincere and glad about it, doing our best to remember the weak. In the Hebrew mindset, to remember is to take action. to act upon. It's not to recall something. It's not to remember something. It's actually to take action, to do something. So we are to be actively involved in this feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread in the natural and getting rid of the leaven in the spiritual. We have to be active. We remove the leavened things from our homes in the natural and the week of removing leaven from our lives, and endeavor to seek and ask forgiveness from our Father. Remove the leaven from our lives spiritually. We eat unleavened things for the 7-day period. The first day, which is the 15th of Aviv, and the 21st day of Aviv are Sabbaths. No work is to be done on those days. We are to gather together. So these are things that we can do today. They're Sabbath days. The first and last days are Sabbath days. We are to gather together and have a holy convocation in praise, in prayer, and worship of Yahweh. These are tangible things that you and I can do. And be happy about it. Be joyful about it. Rejoice in it. Remember that we were once leavened and now we're unleavened in Him. We're set free. He bore our sins. This is what we're to rejoice and to be happy and glad about. What an amazing thing. Well, with that being said, that brings to conclusion the teaching on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I hope it's been helpful to you and that you've enjoyed it. I hope you got some meaning out of it. And if you've not heard these things before, I encourage you to chew on them, go over them. If you think that this teaching could be a benefit of any people that you know in your family or loved ones or friends, this can be found. I'll just quickly bring it up. It can be found on our website. This teaching can be found www.ancientfoundationbiblefellowship.com. I encourage you to go to that website and check out other teachings that we have there. So, that's it. That's finished. I hope you've enjoyed it. I would like to thank Mark David Smith and his team for the opportunity to be able to share with you. I encourage you to tune into the Messianic Lamb Network throughout the week and listen to all the other ministries. There's new shows on there that have just started up, and I believe that there's a couple of new ones not in the far distant future. I encourage you to tune in and to check out all the other ministries. They've all got really good things to share, and also to view these things through the Messianic Lamb Network webpage, as there will become a time in the future, my friend, when you'll not be able to view these things on YouTube or Facebook or things like that. So I encourage you to look at them, get used to watching these things through the Messianic Lamb website, and support this ministry as it's doing wonderful things in reaching and getting the message out. So I hope this teaching has been a blessing and an encouragement to you. I thank you for watching and listening. Until next time, may Yahweh's hand be upon you, and may Yahweh watch over you and protect you and your loved ones. So until this time next week, have a great week and shalom.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.